When disaster hits, it won't just be the power that goes out or the shelves that go empty. Your personal food stash could suddenly become government property. Sounds extreme? It's not. In times of national emergency, laws give governments the right to seize essential resources, and food is at the top of that list. During wars, pandemics, and economic collapses, history has shown us one thing: the state always takes control of supply. But what exactly do they go after first? And could your stockpile be on that list? Today, we're breaking down the 8 types of foods most likely to be seized during a crisis, and why they're targeted. You might be surprised at what's included. Food 1, rice and grains. Rice isn't just food, it is survival. In any crisis, it's the first thing governments look to seize. Why? Because rice and other grains are staples that feed millions. They store well, they distribute easily, and in emergencies, they become tools of power. Take Venezuela in 2009. President Hugo Chavez had the army enter rice mills across the country, some owned by major companies like Empresas Polar or U.S. giant Cargill. Within hours, the military took control. Chavez demanded they ramp up production at prices the private sector refused to accept. For 90 days, the military supervised every step inside those plants. It was not mere confiscation, it was government control through force. And this wasn't the first or last seizure. From 2008 to 2010, Chavez's government repeatedly seized tons of rice and other staples, sometimes thousands of tons from producers for price violations or hoarding. It all happened under the guise of regulating supply, but more often, it fueled shortages and chaos. Fast forward to today, and the pattern still holds. Any country grappling with crisis will target its rice stockpile. Even outside of officially declared emergencies, we see government-held reserves being released or seized to manage prices or supply. For example, in Japan earlier in 2025, the government released 210,000 tons of government-held rice to calm soaring prices and prevent panic. That's a modern reminder. Rice isn't just food. It's strategic leverage. Imagine waking up one morning to find your stockpile flagged as part of government reserves. It's not fiction. It's history repeating itself. And rice, along with other grains, is the first on their list. Food 2. Cooking oil and sugar. Let's talk about 2 things we all take for granted: cooking oil and sugar. They're in almost everything. We use them every single day without even thinking about it. But during a crisis, that changes fast. In Venezuela, this became terrifyingly real. When their economy collapsed, food inflation hit over 1,000%. Store shelves were bare, people were hungry, and the government panicked. But instead of letting the market handle the pressure, they did something else. They took control. Officials started raiding warehouses, seizing private food supplies, and placing government agents inside factories that made sugar and cooking oil. One shocking moment came in 2009 when the military literally occupied rice and oil processing plants. Why? Because those goods were being sold above government price limits. They weren't stolen by criminals. They were confiscated by the state. And here's what most people don't realize. Cooking oil and sugar are 2 of the most powerful food items during a crisis. They're cheap, they store well, and they're absolutely essential. You can't bake bread, fry food, or preserve basic meals without them. That's why governments go after them first. This isn't just old news either. Just recently, in 2024, the global sugar supply took a huge hit due to extreme weather in India and Thailand. That pushed prices up by nearly 40% in some countries, and triggered export bans. Governments stepped in to restrict movement of sugar across borders, to protect domestic needs. What does that mean for you? It means that in a true emergency, if your country's sugar or oil supply runs low, the government can, and often will, take control of what's left, including what's sitting in warehouses or even private reserves. It's uncomfortable to hear, but it's the truth. In most countries, emergency powers give the state the right to seize food items for public use. And oil and sugar? They top the list because they're not just food. They're survival tools. So if you've stocked up on bottles of sunflower oil or bags of sugar thinking you're ready for anything, just remember, those might be the first to disappear, not by looters, but by the people in charge. Food 3. Canned and powdered milk, cheese, tomato sauce. Think about your pantry. What do you reach for during a crisis? Powdered milk for the morning oats? Cans of tomato sauce for easy pasta dinners? Blocks of cheese for comfort? Now imagine turning around to find those staples gone. Government officials just seized them. No warning, no receipts, just moved into your kitchen. Let's go to Venezuela. In the past few years, amid spiraling inflation and food shortages, authorities didn't just target rice and cooking oil. They raided people's homes, snatching powdered milk, canned cheese, even tomato sauce. These items were labeled price-controlled staples, officially sanctioned for emergency distribution. Families woke up to empty shelves stripped of their most trusted provisions as the state diverted shipments to soldiers and vulnerable communities. But the story doesn't end there. Let's jump back in time to World War II America. By 1943, powdered milk brands like Klim became critical for feeding soldiers overseas, and civilians at home were restricted too. Cheese, fats, and even canned milk required ration coupons under the Office of Price Administration. You weren't just cooking dinner, you became part of a national supply chain. And here's the modern twist. Decades later, the U.S. still holds cheese in reserve, known as government cheese. This surplus stockpile originated in the 1980s after dairy price stabilizations and continued as an aid program well into the early 1990s. Millions of families on social support received blocks of processed cheese. Hidden away in giant underground caves, like the ones in Missouri, this cheese became both cushion and shield during economic downturns. But fast forward to just weeks ago, and the story took another surprising turn. In the UK, an outbreak of cattle disease led to an import ban on unpasteurized cheeses from Italy and France. Upscale restaurants are now running dangerously low on mozzarella and brie as shipments get held up at the border, caught in red tape and slow documentation. These are not tin cans. These are fresh, high-end staples. Yet governments don't hesitate to intervene when the stakes feel high. Here's the shocking truth. Whether it's powder, processed blocks, or fancy artisan wheels, cheese and dairy are squarely in the crosshairs during crises. They're calorie-dense, easy to stockpile, and crucial for morale, and that makes them easy to control or confiscate under emergency powers. Protecting your supply means understanding that comfort food can become strategic food. Food. 4. Canned foods. Now here's something that might really surprise you. Canned foods. Yes, simple cans of soup, beans, meat, or vegetables. They're cheap, common, and found in almost every pantry. But in a crisis, they become gold. Governments know this. In fact, canned goods are often among the first things to be seized during national emergencies. Why? Because they're incredibly useful. They don't need refrigeration. They have long shelf lives. And most importantly, they're ready to eat. When supply chains collapse and grocery store shelves go empty, canned foods are a fast, efficient way to feed the masses. And this isn't just some idea floating around in prepper forums. It's happening right now. In July 2025, the Russian government seized control of a major canned food company called Glazprodukt. This wasn't some abandoned warehouse. It was one of Russia's largest producers of canned meats, stews, and ready-to-eat meals. And here's the kicker. The company wasn't even Russian-owned. It was backed by a U.S. investment firm. But that didn't stop the Russian government. With the war in Ukraine draining resources and food supplies tightening, they stepped in and said, "We're taking it. No payout, no permission. Just requisitioned for military and state use." According to reports from Newsweek and Reuters, they seized everything. The factories, the products, the distribution lines. All of it. Why? Because canned food feeds soldiers. It fuels field kitchens. It calms a panicked population when the shelves run dry. It's cheap, portable, and easy to control. Now, Take a moment and think. If that can happen in Russia, what's stopping it from happening anywhere else? In the US, executive orders already give the federal government power to take over food resources during a declared emergency. It's not even a conspiracy. It's written in black and white. During wartime or disaster, food production and distribution can legally be taken over. That includes your private supply, especially if it's considered part of a hoard or stockpile that could serve the greater public. So if you've quietly built up shelves full of canned goods for your family's safety, just know. In the eyes of the law, it's also a potential emergency ration for the state. It's unsettling, it's real, and it's already started. Food 5. Meat, poultry, and processed eggs. When a major crisis hits, you might think the biggest danger to your food is spoilage. But what if the real threat is the government taking it away? Let's talk about meat, poultry, and processed eggs. These aren't just staples on your dinner plate. They're classified as critical protein sources during emergencies. And according to the USDA, there's a legal mechanism already in place that allows them to detain or seize meat products if they're considered unsafe or involved in a public health threat. But here's where it gets dark. What starts as a food safety law can be quickly used as a tool for emergency control. Back in World War II, this was exactly what happened. Meat was heavily rationed, not just because of shortages, but because the military needed steady supplies. Civilians were told to cut back, share, sacrifice. And if you had more than your fair share, it was taken. The government monitored production, distribution, and even home freezers. It wasn't optional. It was mandated. Now, fast forward to today. In the past few years, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw early signs of this happening again. In 2020, major meat processing plants shut down due to outbreaks. The government declared meat supply chains critical infrastructure, giving authorities the power to force plants to stay open under emergency orders. And quietly, behind the scenes, agencies like FEMA and FSEs began reviewing their emergency food seizure policies. One overlooked update came in late 2024, when FEMA restructured its disaster response supply categories. Among the top assets to be stockpiled and, if needed, reallocated under federal control: animal protein. This includes frozen meat, canned poultry, dehydrated eggs, and even processed meat powders used in military rations. A report by Crisis Equipped confirmed this, noting that these foods are easy to store, calorie-dense, and ideal for feeding both civilians and soldiers during prolonged emergencies. Now think about that. You're prepping, storing away meat in your deep freezer, powdered eggs in your pantry, maybe even hunting and freezing your own protein. But if a national emergency is declared, your personal stash could fall under government seizure laws. All it takes is one executive order or an FSES directive to reclassify your food as strategic reserve. The justification? Equitable redistribution. Even more concerning, Newsweek recently reported a real example in 2025. A U.S.-owned canned meat company operating overseas was seized by a foreign government to support its military. If it can happen there, it can happen here, especially in wartime or a major domestic crisis. So what does this mean for you? It means storing meat isn't just about keeping it cold or hidden from neighbors. It's about understanding the legal environment. It's about realizing that the food in your home isn't always just yours, not during a declared emergency. The truth is, when a crisis hits, meat isn't just food, it's fuel. And in the eyes of the government, it might be too valuable to leave in private hands. Food 6. Fuel for military rations. This next one is a real eye-opener. We're talking about shelf-stable foods that the military can use during war or conflict, and how when things go bad, your private food supply can turn into a government asset overnight. Here's what most people don't realize. When a country enters a serious crisis, especially war, one of the first things the government secures is food for the military. And that doesn't just mean buying it from the market. In some cases, they seize it. That's not a conspiracy theory. It just happened. In July 2025, a major headline broke that many people missed. A Russian court officially took over the assets of a US-owned food company operating in Russia. The company, Glav Product, is one of the largest producers of canned food in the country: soups, meats, stews, and ready-to-eat meals. It's the kind of food that stays good for months, even years. The kind of food preppers, survivalists, and yes, armies, depend on. But here's the twist. This wasn't a bankruptcy or a business deal. The court ruled that the Russian state could take control of the company so that the food it produced could be used to feed Russian soldiers. The company was literally taken overnight. One day it was private property. The next, it belonged to the government. Why? Because military needs came first. Now, pause for a second and really think about that. If it can happen there, it can happen anywhere. In any country where the government has emergency powers, including the US, it is legally allowed to confiscate food and resources if national security or public need demands it. This isn't some hidden law buried in legal codes. It's written into executive orders and emergency management plans. And the type of food they go after? It's exactly the kind of stuff most of us stockpile for emergencies. Canned meats, shelf-stable soups, dehydrated meals, protein bars, MREs, meals ready to eat, pasta, rice, beans, high-calorie, high-protein foods with long shelf lives. Why? Because these foods are perfect for soldiers asterisk. They're lightweight, compact, energy-dense, and don't spoil quickly. In a crisis, they become strategic. Not just food, but fuel for combat. And once food becomes strategic, it no longer matters if you bought it legally or stored it quietly. The government has the legal power to take it, redistribute it, or ration it as they see fit, especially if it's needed for the military. So if you've got a stash of these items sitting in your basement, thinking you're ready for whatever comes next, you might not be the only one thinking that. In a crisis, the government might be thinking the same thing, but for their troops. And the scary part? You probably won't get a warning. Food 7. Flour and pasta. Let's talk about something that might be sitting in your kitchen right now. Flour and pasta. Ordinary stuff, right? Cheap, simple, easy to ignore. But in a crisis, this humble pair turns into gold. No joke. History and recent events show that when things fall apart, governments don't just focus on oil, fuel, or medicine, they zero in on food staples. And flour and pasta are at the top of the list. Why? Because these are high-density survival foods. One bag of flour can feed a family for days. A single box of pasta, quick, filling, and nearly zero waste. It's not gourmet, but it keeps people alive, and that's exactly why it becomes a government priority in hard times. During the early days of the 2020 pandemic, remember what disappeared first from grocery shelves? Pasta. Completely wiped out. People weren't just panic buying. It turns out governments were buying too. Behind the scenes, emergency agencies were bulking up their mass feeding reserves. Flour, pasta, rice, these were considered critical assets. FEMA, for example, has long stocked flour and dried pasta as part of their crisis response kits. And this isn't just a thing of the past. In early 2024, when global shipping lanes were disrupted by the Red Sea attacks and Eastern European conflicts flared again, some countries like Germany, Poland, and even parts of the UK quietly moved to protect and control local food processors. There were reports of government stockpile contracts being reactivated, especially with pasta manufacturers and grain mills. Not many people noticed, but those who did understood one thing. When governments get nervous, they don't start with fancy food. They start with flour. What's even more chilling? In countries like Venezuela, flour was so vital that the military began guarding distribution centers during food shortages. And in past crises, governments have gone as far as regulating how much a person can buy or keep. The reasoning is simple. If it's cheap, filling, and non-perishable, it becomes a public necessity. And when things get chaotic, anything considered a necessity can be taken under emergency powers. So, if you've got bags of flour stored away, or shelves lined with spaghetti and penne, you might want to think twice about how and where you store it. Because when the crisis sirens go off and food becomes power, Those simple carbs you tucked away for comfort could end up on the government's radar, not because you're doing anything wrong, but because you're prepared, and that, in a broken system, is sometimes seen as a threat. Food. 8. Water and basic beverages. Let that sink in for a second. In times of chaos, whether it's war, natural disasters, or nationwide shortages, you may think your stockpile of canned goods is the first thing they'll come for. But here's what most people forget. Water is life. And in a crisis, your stored water could very well be the first thing the government takes control of. Why? Because water isn't just a resource, it's a matter of survival. You can go 3 weeks without food, but 3 days without water? That's fatal. And that's exactly why governments across the world, including the US, have laws that allow them to seize, reroute, or restrict private water supplies in emergency situations. Let's take a real-life example. In California, which faces recurring droughts, there have already been cases where private water wells were monitored, and residents were warned, or even fined, for unauthorized water use. Some communities had their wells capped. Others were told how much water they could use per day. The justification? It was needed for public use and community protection. Now imagine you've been prepping. You've stored 100 gallons of clean drinking water in your basement. You've done everything right. You're ready to protect your family. But then, the government shows up at your door with legal authority and tells you, this water is being seized for emergency use. It sounds like something out of a dystopian novel, but it's actually written into executive orders and emergency acts that are still in effect. Let's go even deeper. According to Executive Order 13603, signed under the National Defense Resources Preparedness Act, the U.S. government can seize all forms of energy, food resources, and water resources during a declared emergency. That includes well water, private storage tanks, rainwater harvesting systems, and even bottled water if it's considered a resource needed for emergency distribution. And if you think that's a rare case, think again. In 2023, after the train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio, where chemicals were released into the environment, bottled water was immediately rerouted to the area. People in neighboring counties reported shortages and price spikes within 48 hours. The government didn't confiscate personal supplies in that case, but the message was clear. When disaster hits, distribution decisions are no longer yours to make. Now here's something even more chilling. In Russia, just recently, in 2025, authorities seized a U.S.-owned food company called Glazprodukt, known for canned goods and bottled beverages. Why? To redirect those supplies to the military. This is a reminder that when things get tense, whether due to war, supply chain collapse, or internal unrest, even private companies and foreign-owned assets can be taken over in the name of national interest. That includes water bottling plants, beverage warehouses, and delivery trucks. And you might say, well, I'm just one person. They won't come after me. But history tells us otherwise. Back during World War II, not just in the US, but also in the UK and parts of Europe, people who stored too much food or water, more than their allowed ration, were labeled as hoarders. Some were fined. Others were arrested. Their supplies confiscated. The government believed it had to protect fairness in distribution, and that mindset hasn't gone away. It's just been updated for the modern age. With better tracking, surveillance, and legal language, even beverages aren't off the list. Baby formula, Gatorade, protein shakes, bottled teas, and electrolyte drinks have all become hot items in emergencies. Remember the 2022 baby formula shortage? That wasn't just panic buying. The government actually intervened, seizing large shipments of formula to redirect them to hospitals and WIT programs. And while the intention was good, protecting vulnerable infants, it left millions of parents desperate. So here's the takeaway. If you think storing just food is enough, think again. Water is more heavily regulated, more essential, and more likely to be targeted when things fall apart. Your best defense? Stay informed. Don't draw attention. Diversify your storage, both in location and type. And most importantly, understand the laws in your area. Because when crisis hits, the question won't be if the government takes control. It'll be what they take first. And asterisk how much you're willing to lose. Let's be honest. If you're preparing for a crisis, storing food is only half the battle. The real challenge? Keeping it safe. So now that we've gone over the types of food the government is most likely to seize in a crisis, the next logical question is, how do you protect what you've worked so hard to build up? Let's break it down. Not with paranoia, but with smart, quiet strategies that help you stay under the radar. 1. Know the laws in your area. This is step 1, and most people skip it. Every country, and sometimes even every state or province, has its own emergency powers. Some allow food seizure. Others limit water use. Some regulate the amount of fuel, medicine, and even baby formula you can store. Take the time to research your local laws. Read up on your country's disaster preparedness acts, food control policies, and what's allowed during martial law or national emergency. The more you know, the better you can plan. Because trust me, the worst time to learn the rules is when someone's knocking at your door, asking what you've got stored in your basement. 2. Keep records, but don't overshare. This sounds strange, but keeping receipts and inventory lists can actually help protect you. If you ever need to prove that your food wasn't hoarded or taken unlawfully, you'll want some form of documentation, especially for bulk purchases. But be smart. Don't share those records online. Don't brag in Facebook groups or post photos of your stockpile on Reddit. That digital trail, it can be tracked. And yes, in a full-scale crisis, your online activity could come back to bite you. 3. Use secure off-grid storage. Here's where it gets practical. You need to think beyond the pantry. If everything you've stored is in your kitchen or garage, it's easy to find and easy to take. Instead, spread it out. Use multiple storage points. Consider waterproof bins in sheds, root cellars, hidden compartments under stairs, or even cache systems buried underground. Sound extreme? Maybe. But if a crisis ever reaches that level, you'll be glad your entire supply isn't in one obvious place. The goal isn't to hide from the government. It's to avoid being swept up in a blanket seizure meant for large-scale stockpiles or illegal hoarding operations. 4. Don't draw attention. This one's simple but powerful. Don't talk about your prepping habits in public. Don't show neighbors the new food freezer in your garage. Don't have massive food deliveries dropped at your door every week. You want to blend in, not stand out. In times of peace, people will envy your preparedness. In times of crisis, they'll resent it or report it. History has shown us that during wartime, neighbors turned in neighbors for hoarding. And in modern times, one social media post could lead to unwanted attention from the wrong people, or even the government. 5. Rotate and refresh. Quietly stockpiling is only smart if you're also maintaining it. That means checking expiration dates, rotating supplies, and making sure nothing's going to waste. But again, do it quietly. Don't make it obvious that you're storing years' worth of food. If you shop in bulk, space out your trips. If you order online, use different addresses or pickup points when possible. Your food is your safety net, and you have every right to prepare for your family's future. But the more prepared you are, the more discreet you must be. Because in a world that's unprepared, the prepared stand out. And standing out in a crisis? That's dangerous. So, there you have it. The 8 foods most likely to be seized when crisis hits. From rice to water, nothing is truly off limits when emergency laws kick in. And while that may sound scary, it's also a wake-up call. Now is the time to prepare smart, stay low-key, and protect what's yours, without making yourself a target. Because in the end, survival isn't just about what you store. It's about how well you keep it. Stay safe, stay sharp, and stay one step ahead.